Hello and welcome to the final instalment of Politics Live, Upstart's live broadcast dedicated to bring you the latest from the 2016 federal election. We've been providing running analysis of the campaign by recapping the news of the week and asking how the strategy of each party is playing out more broadly. I'm Rudy Etzel, your host, joined by Uni Poll Watch editor Matthew Elmas.
Hey.
Sorry, student editor. And we were meant to be joined today by Kate Kelly, Upstart's incoming co-editor, but she's had some urgent journalism come up, so she's had to run off to that, and we can't really fault her for that now, can we?
No, we can't.
No, so we'll start with a recap of the week, as we have done the last 5 weeks or so. And the coalition started running a message of stability after the uncertainty of Britain's Brexit vote, which threw Europe and the Western world into chaos. They wanted to just underline that they will remain stable. A scandal implicating the Australian Border Force reared its head on Monday, with more than 100 allegations of corrupt activity in Australia's visa programs being referred to the National Corruption Watchdog. Labor took some heat for costings it released over the weekend, which appeared to show them banking coalition's super savings, even though they wouldn't commit to the actual policy itself. The coalition released their own wave of costing measures on Tuesday, mostly to integrate the promises they've made during the campaign, which they say will cost $1.2 billion. Marriage equality was the theme during the week, with Bill Shorten saying that he would make it his first piece of legislation if elected, while ACT Liberal Senator Zed Seselja indicated he would abstain from a parliamentary vote if the plebiscite were to pass. Scott Morrison and Julie Bishop also refused to say how they would vote if the plebiscite carried. Bill Shorten made it clear he was open to a federal independent commission against corruption following the Eddie Obeid scandal. We'll have more on that a bit later. And Tony Windsor made headlines on Thursday with a tweet where he said that Peter Credlin makes a good cup of tea that's been labelled sexist. The coalition continued to be pressed on the plebiscite, with Turnbull saying the election tomorrow is not a referendum on gay marriage. And Seselja was back in the news today after video of defaced Greens leaflets on his tour bus surfaced. He's come under fire from the Greens candidate up there, Christina Hobbs, who said he should seriously assess his position. So that's the week that was. What have you made of it so far, Matt?
Yeah, well, this week we're coming into the week before the election out. We're on election eve. The election's tomorrow, and we've seen the coalition really come off of that Brexit vote quite strongly with messaging that they're the stable choice, and that a Labor government would form a coalition with the Greens and Independents. They're trying to make voters think back to 2013, the chaos that people were talking about there with the Rudd years, and they're really trying to hammer home the message that they're the stable government, they're the people that are going to be able to lead Australia confidently, and that given the uncertain international waters we're in, we need a stable government. So that's been their home run message this week.
Do you think that message has resonated?
To an extent, yes. It's one of those messages that's very easy to understand. I think people remember the 2013 Rudd years. It wasn't as long ago. John Howard and a lot of the things that he didn't, a lot of the grievances that people had with him when he got taken out by, well, not taken out, but he lost an election to Kevin Rudd in 2007.
Lost his seat as well, didn't he?
Yes, but people have moved on from that. It's not as fresh in people's heads, but the 2013 Rudd years are still fresh in people's heads, and the coalition have really been trying to drive the message home that a vote for Labor, a vote for basically anyone that isn't them, is a vote for instability, a vote for a minority coalition like the one we saw in 2013. Yeah,
they've pushed that line quite hard, haven't they? They're not only attacking Labor, but they're attacking the concept of small parties in ads.
Yeah, well, they've devoted quite a bit more attention to independents and even smaller parties, particularly Nick Xenophon, this election season. They've come out and said that, a vote for Nick Xenophon is a vote for chaos. We don't know what he believes. A vote for the Greens is a vote for a Labor-Greens, coalition. They have been devoting a lot more time, resources, money, and things like that to attacking these smaller groups because they're rising in popularity. Over the last few elections, minor and small parties have gotten a lot more popular, and we'll talk a bit more about that later. But I think from the point of view of the coalition at this point, their position is that, okay, we're the government, we've got a sizable seat lead on Labor at the moment. What we need to present ourselves as is the stable party that's ready to govern after July 2nd, and we'll take that message to the election.
Maybe stick with the current mob.
Yeah, that especially because in Australia we have a history of re-electing governments after that have only been in for one term. We have a history of
do we though?
We do. Historically, throughout Australia's electoral past, a one-term government is
Becomes two.
Far rarer than a two-term government. Two-term governments are really the norm.
Has not the history been blown up a bit in the last decade or so, though?
Well, I suppose the kind of instability that we saw last year in the Liberal Party with Tony Abbott and Malcolm Turnbull kind of might change the discussion there a little bit. But what I think we're going to see is a lot of people coming out and voting for what they've traditionally voted for. A lot of seats in Australia are safe. There are marginal seats, but we don't generally see massive swings in Australian elections, especially not the kind of swing that would be required for, Labor to get an outstanding majority in the lower house at this point. So they are definitely fighting an uphill battle, but we'll have to see what happens after tomorrow's vote.
Yeah, it's the polls have been interesting lately, haven't they? They've basically come back to a neck and neck type scenario between the two.
Yeah,
parties.
well, we also have to remember that polling in Australian elections is inherently difficult. There are a lot of seats. There are 150 seats in the lower house, and it's difficult to poll even all the marginal seats. There are a lot of different nuances and factors that come into play when you're polling lots of different electorates, as opposed to an American presidential race where you're really polling two candidates against each other. So I think it's always worth treating polling with a grain of salt. Really, you just have to see how voters turn out on election day.
Yep, fair enough. It's just interesting that it's become this close. There wasn't, until the last sort of couple of months, there wasn't any way I could have seen anything but a really big swing one way or the other, a really big push towards one party or the other. So it's interesting to see them come neck and neck, and I suppose it says quite a bit about the way Labor have approached this campaign.
Yeah, well, in the last couple of weeks, Labor have kind of stuck to that Medicare messaging. We talked about it last week. Labor have, been very hard on what they've said is the coalition's plan to privatise Medicare. Or this week, it's kind of changed to there will be significant cuts to Medicare.
Do you think that's resonated with the electorate?
Well, the thing about the Medicare campaign is that it's something that the Labor have been traditionally very strong on. Labor have always been strong on health and education. Health has always been one of their big policy platforms, and it's traditionally been something they've tried to juxtapose themselves to the coalition with. So I don't think we should be surprised to see them going so hard on Medicare. But given what Malcolm Turnbull has come out and said about Medicare, that there won't be cut. He came out and said this morning there won't be cuts. He has said in the past that no element of it will be privatised. The coalition is committed to continuing the freeze on Medicare, but that was instated by Labor in 2013. So I think what we need to remember at this stage is that there's definitely a reason that the Labor Party feel like they need to go with the Medicare messaging at this point. And it does definitely keep the coalition off message a little bit. I think I said this last week. We've seen a lot less jobs and growth in the last couple of weeks, and we've seen a lot more Turnbull and the coalition being defensive on Medicare. And I think Labor count that as a bit of a win in some respects. But, I think Bill Shorten must be terrified to go on 7:30 at this point, because he's gone on for 2 interviews now with Lee Sales, and Lee Sales has just hammered him on Medicare both times. And both times it's just been fairly obvious that he hasn't had an answer he's really, been comfortable giving, and he's had to give a lot of kind of talking point answers while Lee Sales is just going at him, and it starts getting awkward at some point.
He even got done by that sharpest of Australian political minds, Karl Stefanovic, on Today just recently, didn't he?
Yes.
That was an embarrassing one.
Yeah,
for him.
well, we are getting to the pointy end of the campaign, and now the electorate's really starting to pay attention, and interviews like that become increasingly important. We've seen the PM adopt a strategy this week of going on a lot of radio shows. The PM's been very active on the radio airwaves, and he has come out and just put out his agenda, and people seem to be resonating with that. And the question for Labor now is, how well can they do grabbing those voters in those marginal seats that have been getting hammered by coalition messaging of stability and things like that, messages that Australians traditionally resonate with.
That, at the end of the day, is the real crux of the entire election, isn't it? Because it seems like Labor's made a lot of inroads into the primary vote in general, but they're not seeing the results in the polling in the marginal seats.
Yeah, well, there was some polling that came out a couple of weeks ago that showed that Labor was a little bit behind in Western Australia. They needed to be doing a little bit better there. But really, this election, like all other Australian elections in recent memory, will come down to Queensland and New South Wales, a lot of the marginal seats in those states. And I think what we're going to see there is a very interesting contest. Obviously, we don't want to preempt what the result will be tomorrow. Who knows? That's for the voters to decide. But where we've been seeing the leaders spend their time is incredibly interesting. They've spent a lot of time in those marginal seats in New South Wales and Queensland.
Yeah,
which is exactly
Eden
where people
Monaro has probably never seen so many politicians in its life.
Yeah, which is exactly where people expected them to spend their time. Victoria doesn't get as much love because generally Victorian Swedes don't swing as much. But it comes down to a question of where the parties think that they need to make ground, and you can see that based on where the leader and where the deputy, so where Tanya Plibersek, Bill Shorten, or where Malcolm Turnbull and Julie Bishop have really been. Barnaby Joyce gets in there as well. They send him around a tour to the regional areas, the so-called the pub trail.
They don't trust him in the city?
Well, it's just that he represents regional Australia. They like to get him out there, onto the Wombat Trail, as they've been calling it, and get that message out there for the Nationals.
And the Barnaby Trail, as they should rename it.
Barnaby Trail.
So there's been a little bit of a few questions raised about Shorten's status as head of the Labor Party.
Yeah, well, so the Labor Party changed the rules on leadership challenges and leaders of the party after what they've called a disaster in their own right. So they have come out and said that they're not proud of that period of their party's life. They changed the rules, but the rules actually allow for a situation where if Bill Shorten loses this election, there would be an opening for a leadership contest. And there has been talk that Anthony Albanese would perhaps make that challenge. And Bill Shorten has kind of not given that question the time of day this week. He's kind of sidestepped it. He obviously doesn't want to talk about it. No more than the coalition want to talk about Tony Abbott. But it's certainly an interesting question. If Bill Shorten does lose this election, and certainly a numbers man would think that he may get close, but he's definitely got an uphill battle to fight. That whether or not he'll see a challenge from Anthony Albanese or somebody else in the Labor Party, and we'll see factional shifts and things like that. That's really the big question. And I think Batman, in that respect, is actually very important there too, because if David Feeney gets deposed by Alex Patel in Batman, David Feeney is actually a prominent member of Labor's Right Unity faction. So that could really work in the left faction's favour. Obviously, Anthony Albanese, a member of that left Labor faction, he will indirectly or directly benefit from, if he does contest the leadership, David Feeney not being there to be that power broker in the Labor Party.
This is all so Labor Party, isn't it?
Yes, well,
competing interests, hoping your own team loses.
That happens in all parties as well. The Greens, they have their own factional problems. The Liberal Party, we've seen a lot of factional turmoil. We've seen factional turmoil in the Liberal Party as early as this week. Tony Abbott came out in Sky News earlier this week, and he said that there hasn't been enough focus on security in this election, and really coming out and criticising your own party's messaging less than a fortnight out from an election or a week out from an election.
I believe in Australian politics they call that pulling a Kevin Rudd.
Yeah. Well, it's quite interesting to see that, after all this time, there is still a bit. And the media love Tony Abbott because anytime he gets up there, the question comes up, is he going to take a swipe at Malcolm Turnbull? And, they really love that. And it's interesting to see him coming out and making those kind of a little bit, he's obviously not coming out and saying Malcolm Turnbull's got it wrong. He's just said, being very subtle about it. So there is definitely factional issues still going on in the Liberal Party, Labor Party, and the Greens. It happens everywhere. There's a lot of power to be gained, and there's a lot of people that want power. And politics is as much about convincing the people in the electorate as it is convincing the people in your own party that you're the right person for the job.
Indeed. All right, let's move on now to corruption. And the Independent Commission Against Corruption's come up again. A federal version of that body has come up again this week after the Eddie Obeid scandal. So what's he done, Matt?
Yeah, well, Eddie Obeid has been found to be, we could say we're found to be at this point engaging in so-called corrupt activity by lobbying people in New South Wales to create a situation where his business interests in a number of cafes would directly benefit. and he's been found out now. Mike Bards came out and said that, he's a disgrace to Australian democracy or something along those lines. I can't remember the exact words. And it's brought up calls for the need for a federal independent commission against corruption, or a federal ICAC. Now, the New South Wales ICAC was fundamental in this investigation, and people are saying, look, Bill Shorten said
brought down Barry O'Farrell, didn't it?
Exactly, and what people are saying at this point is maybe we need a federal ICAC. The Greens have been for years saying that we need a federal ICAC. I know Hugh McKinnon, the Greens candidate for Jagger, I had some chats with him, and one of his big things is, the first thing he said to me when I asked, what are you passionate about, is like, I think we need a federal ICAC, and the Greens have been very passionate about that for quite a while.
Why is there not a federal ICAC already?
Well, it's sort of one of those policy areas that's been looked at before. There was a federal ICAC at one point. But what we've seen is Bill Shorten come out now and saying he's open to revisiting the idea after the Eddie Abid scandal came out. What's interesting is that PUP Senator Dio Wang actually...
Palmer United Party.
Yeah, Palmer United Party Senator Dio Wang actually was in negotiations over the ABCC legislation with the coalition, and basically said, look, I want to, I will support this legislation or something along those lines, as a negotiation tool if, we bring the idea of a federal ICAC back into the agenda via a private members bill. And if you support me, then, I'll use quid pro quo kind of thing. And at that point, the coalition, Dio Wang says that the coalition were just unprepared to support his private members bill, to kind of reintroduce that idea of a federal ICAC. So the coalition in a little bit of awkward water with this federal ICAC thing, given what Senator Dio Wang has said. What will be interesting to see is how much that kind of messaging resonates with the electorate. So Bill Shorten has been quite anti-big end of town since the start, and this kind of feeds back into that messaging. He's been there for a Royal Commission Royal Commission into the banking sector since the start of the campaign, something that the coalition weren't necessarily in support of. They were in support of this increasing the funding back to the old levels of the watchdog that's implemented to watch the banking sector.
It's an important policy for Shorten, arguably, because he's trying to wrestle back an element of trustworthiness. The electorate views Turnbull as quite a trustworthy person, and Shorten not so much. So if he can be strong on the messaging of corruption, then
the polling information at the moment shows that, and the ABC was reporting on this earlier this week, that Malcolm Turnbull still has a big lead over Bill Shorten in terms of trustworthiness in the electorate. Believe in the polls to whatever extent you will. But I think one thing is clear: what Bill Shorten has tried to do this election is set up a kind of adversarial dichotomy between the big end of town and everybody else. It's a very simple message. It's a message that's easy to understand. It's a message that makes for punching sound bites. And we've seen him, come out and kind of juxtapose himself to Malcolm Turnbull as that guy looking out for the little guy, looking out for the working man, if you will, and that Malcolm Turnbull, he doesn't want a Royal Commission into the banks. He doesn't necessarily want a federal ICAC, although they haven't been completely clear on that, but they are in a bit of awkward water with it. So I think Bill Shorten has approached this final week saying, okay, we're going to stick to our guns. We're going to continue with this idea that we're going to be for cracking down on the big end of town, to give back to the little guy, if you will, and we're going to be for protecting health. We're going to be for good education, and this is the platform we're going to run on. Traditional Labor platform, say what you will about the Medicare campaign, whereas Malcolm Turnbull has kind of been going with a stability message, but at the same time he's been coming out, saying we're not going to make cuts to Medicare, and just hoping that his trustworthiness, because at this point it's a question of trust. The Medicare question is a question of trust. Malcolm Turnbull said we're not cutting Medicare, we're not privatising Medicare. Bill Shorten saying they're privatising Medicare, they're going to make cuts to Medicare. So it's at this point, it's who do you trust and who do you believe? So I guess we'll see what the electorate thinks about that.
Yes, we will. We'll also find out what the electorate feels tomorrow about the prevalence of the independent or minor parties in Australian politics over the last few years. Now, there's been a huge amount of work done by those groups and by the major parties as well to really try and draw some battle lines there. They've got the Senate voting reforms that were aimed at sort of pushing them out. And then we've also got the double dissolution that's going to increase the chances of quite a few of them getting in because there's twice as many seats to go around in the Senate. They've finally got a bit of media attention this time around, Matt.
Yeah, well, we discussed this a little bit earlier. The minor parties have been increasing their share of the vote as a bloc, rather as a group of non-major parties. Their share of the vote has been increasing, very substantially over the last few elections. And this year, we're really beginning to see it really show in the media coverage. We've seen, minor parties or independents, kind of people like the Jackie Lambie Network, Glenn Lazarus, even Pauline Hanson. Ricky Muir has been getting attention in the airwaves as well.
Bob Katter?
Bob Katter got a little bit, but, Bob Katter's always been there.
Bob Katter.
These people that got in and now they're facing this double dissolution election, they've been quite vocal and people have been paying a bit of attention. And what we've seen in response is the big parties start committing a lot more resources, both of them, in fact, Labor and Liberal Party committing resources to try and combat these parties.
And attack ads that just say,
exactly.
Don't vote for anyone but us. Yeah.
And, saying, you'll waste your vote and things
chaos.
like that. And, it's a little bit disingenuous to some extent because we do have a preferential voting system in Australia. So for people like Julie Bishop to come out and say that a vote for Nick Xenophon or a vote for Jackie Lambie or a vote for any of these minor parties or independents is a wasted vote is just a little bit disingenuous given that we have a preferential system. But I suppose they are really feeling the pressure at this point that they really don't want to be losing seats to Nick Xenophon, or the coalition don't want to be losing seats to Nick Xenophon, at a time when in 2019 or even from that they might be, or even this election, they might be facing a serious contest from the Labor Party in terms of keeping that lower house majority that they've enjoyed for the last 3 years.
Yeah, that's right. So you think there's issues in regards to the minor parties? Do you think that there's issues with, you'd say Jackie Lambie, you've mentioned her, like she got elected as a Palmer United Party senator, and now she's got her own party, whatever it's called. Do you think that this gets a bit too confusing for the electorate and they sort of end up washing their hands of it and saying, I'm not bothering with that kind of drama? Do you know what I mean?
Well, Jackie Lambie's actually become quite a personality in Tasmania in her own right. And I think,
and Australia,
betting people and pundits in Tasmania specifically have actually, are fairly confident she might actually get a seat in Tasmania. Tasmania's a bit of a different beast as a territory, not a state, and it is a double dissolution election. So
Tasmania's a state? What are you talking? What? Isn't Tasmania a state?
No, sorry.
My
mistake.
Fewer,
it has fewer senators.
Right,
yes. My mistake. What we, I think, need to keep in mind is that
just what our listeners in Tasmania, we love you.
Kay Kelly, actually, our Tasmanian, not here today, but who
our
would
Tasmanian
otherwise represent
correspondent,
Tasmania would have probably pulled me up on that. So I think what we need to keep in mind is that these candidates like Jackie Lambie actually have a chance of getting in. Glenn Lazarus as well. People are saying now with the preferential, with the voting changes to preferences in the Senate, that Pauline Hanson actually might have a shot because parties are less able to preference against her.
Back to the good old days. Finally, we're bringing back the 90s.
Yeah, and so I think what we're going to see increasingly is just, to some extent we're seeing this around the world, in London, in the US, people are becoming a little more disillusioned with those establishment larger parties, and they're moving towards these smaller groups that have different views, and that diversity is really starting to creep its way into the parliament.
Yeah, I think that's a fascinating thing and a great point that you made about this is a worldwide scenario. This is why we've got Donald Trump running for president. This is why English people felt they were kicking back in voting against the staying in the EU, because people are just sick in the Western world of this being. They feel like they live under this yoke of government that they can't relate to. So, yeah, perhaps that's the point. Maybe we will see more Jackie Lambie types in Parliament in the future. Let's move on. A fascinating electorate this time around. Batman. We're nearly there.
Yes, the good old Batman watch.
Yeah, that's right. How's it looking, Matt?
Yeah, well, Batman is really heating up. I got a text message yesterday from one of the people I have on the ground at Batman that I talked to a bit, and he said, "Come down to Northcote. There's some tensions going on between the ALP and the Greens at pre-poll." I'm just like, oh, what's going on here? So I called a bunch of people that I know that are around the area, and they're just like, well, they said you could cut the tension in the air with a knife. There's at any time there's 100 volunteers around the pre-polls in Batman over the last week, and the tension is in the air. You can almost feel it, and it's coming down to the wire in Batman, and you're really feeling that tension amongst the people on different sides of the campaigns. There's a lot on the line here. This is more than just the Greens versus the ALP. This is the campaign strategy of all the of the Greens, ALP, and the Liberal Party in a Melbourne seats in Victoria for the next 10 years at stake here.
I think personally, if the Greens win this, it spells massive disaster for Labor going forward over the next couple of generations. And I mean, they would need to really reconsider what they stand for as a party if they lose this seat to the Greens.
It will be interesting. I'm not sure if I would, say over generations, but in the next few elections, it will definitely be the case that if Batman does fall now, suddenly you're not looking at Batman's the seat that's contesting in 2019. You're looking at Higgins, you're looking at Wills, you're even looking at Jagger.
Higgins is an interesting one. This election, there's some modelling that says that the Greens are in with a chance of winning it. And I don't think it's even gotten past the primary vote in the last 70 years.
I think we need to take that data definitely with a grain of salt, given that the Greens are the people that are advertising a lot of this messaging.
No, let's run with this.
They're doing very well in these seats. The Greens definitely want to give off the messaging that, yes, they're really in with a contest now, but after those preference deals done between Labor and Liberal Party, I think most people are pretty confident that the really only contestable seat is Batman. And when we saw that Labor-Liberal preference deal done, we thought, okay, Alex Patal's done. But
she might just have enough force of personality to win it herself.
That, her face is on every street corner in that electorate.
Spending quite a bit of time in an electorate.
They've literally painted it green. They did this in 2010 with Adam Ban. I don't know if any listeners or watchers or even you, Rudy, remember 2010 in Melbourne. You went around a street corner, you saw a photo of Adam Ban's face. I was in Northland Shopping Centre the other day in Preston, and there was Alex Patal's face just strewn around the shopping centre everywhere. And they've really turned it green, and people do eventually, when they go to the polling booth, they go, oh, Alex Patal, yes, I've seen her face.
All right, let's move on to our very last Dutton of the week. We've got, it was the Prime Minister this week, wasn't it?
Indeed.
So we've got the footage.
Not every Dutton of the week is a gaff, but this one was very hilarious.
Yeah, it's very cute.
Where is Liz?
She's gone up to the...
Is she? We've got to find Liz. Okay.
We can't find Liz.
Okay. Is she? Okay. Yours just is she? Okay. I think she's gone to a toy store.
There you go. Pretty cute stuff.
Yeah,
Malcolm,
indeed.
A bit like a headless chook without his wife.
Yeah.
He really looked lost and aimless for a man that's leading our nation.
Rare unscripted moment. Less than a week out from an election, he eventually found Lucy in a toy store. She was purchasing a gift for their grandson.
That isn't absolutely adorable. That's so cute.
Yeah, very interesting. The journos following around the PM don't really get many unscripted moments, but that was certainly one, and they were quick to jump on that one. I think the ABC Live blog immediately changed its title to Malcolm Turnbull Loses Wife. So it was definitely quite funny. Quite a cute moment. Lucy Turnbull's obviously a big part of Malcolm Turnbull's life. She's, not just, his partner in life, but someone he said many times, someone he relies on for advice and things like that. So she's a big part of his campaign as well. So she'd be definitely not
humanises him a little bit.
Not the kind
perhaps.
of person you'd want to lose.
No, that's right. Humanises him a little bit. Perhaps. So that's actually us done for this week and for the election as a whole.
In general.
It's been a pleasure to bring you our analysis every week. My name's Rudy Etzel. I've been joined week in, week out by Matt Elmas. We've got to also thank Naeem Kurt for his time, Kate Kelly, Jake Alexander, Max Robbins, Mark Purdom, Hugh Martin, and also Phil Kafkalutis for their help with us. So good luck tomorrow with your vote. And
please go out and vote. Whatever you believe.
Think before you vote.
Go out and vote.
Do it with consideration.
Vote for what you believe for. It's an important election.
Hopefully your team wins.